Well, Facebook's changes have been broad and sweeping. Government agencies have been caught up in the crossfire, as we just said, with many emergency services and health department pages being shut off. Many Australians have taken to social media to slam Facebook for being tone deaf by its actions after being unable to get updates related to the pandemic, as well as important information about weather from the Bureau of Meteorology. The ACT Government page, Queensland Health, the Australian Bureau of Meteorology page and the New South Wales Fire page are among those removed. Facebook has released a statement saying the government pages shouldn't be impacted. The law does not provide clear guidance on the definition of news content, so we've taken a broad definition in order to respect the law as drafted. However, we will reverse any pages impacted. Well, joining me now to dive further into this issue is Dr. Karen Sutherland from the University of Sunshine Coast, Con Frantzeskos, who's the CEO of Global Digital Consultancy, and of course, Aaron Young, who's the CEO of Ticker News International. Thank you all for joining me today. Con, let's start with you. You recently said news companies need to innovate fast. Are media companies being too reliant on big tech to carry them?
Absolutely, Ash. I think if we look at the history of media in Australia, particularly print media, they were once supported by these golden rivers of revenues from things like jobs, cars and real estate. And what we've seen is jobs turned into Seek, cars turned into car sales and real estate turned into REA. And so those big profits that were funding quality journalism disappeared. And then what you saw was that these media companies not only missed the boat on those three areas, they've now missed the boat on how they can better monetize their audiences, how they can best get their news out there. And so what I believe they're doing is that they're now turning to Canberra and saying, well, we've missed the boat on so many different areas. We need you to help us take some money from the people that, ironically enough, are driving about 30% of our traffic. And trying to get some money from them and give it to us. And to me, that's just a nonsensical approach.
Now, Aaron, you're the CEO of a startup media company. What's your reaction to that?
It doesn't really surprise me, but I feel like Facebook has used traditional media companies. And as Con was saying, Facebook was an easy place for media companies to get their content out at a time when it felt like the world was against these media companies. And I think that what's happened is suddenly both sides have collided, where these media organizations have said, wait a minute, kind of not making the money out of this that we were hoping to. In fact, give us something, because now most of our audience is coming through Google and Facebook, and we're relying so heavily on these, but we're not getting any money for it. For us at Ticker, we never relied on money from Facebook and Google. We don't get any money from either. In fact, part of our business model is to support Australian businesses in boosting their message. We pay Facebook from Ticker's point of view. They've blocked our page today. Now, in any other industry, you'd be able to sue in a situation like that. They're paying a company for a service, and then all of a sudden they just wipe you from for no fault of your own. We haven't asked Facebook for any money. What I will say is we've obviously been with them. They hold the keys to decide whether or not a news organisation like Ticker, which, as you know, Ash, we support about 20 journalists who are all working out there in the newsroom right now. Facebook and Google decide whether we, the news publishers, but us. It's a very weird world.
And Karen, to you, is this an overstep of power from Facebook, do you think?
It's definitely a power play, and it's going to be interesting to see if they actually uphold it. So I've gone, when the government sites were blocked today, they have reversed some of those. I've gone on and had a look. Queensland Health is back and the Bureau of Meteorology is back. Why they were banned in the first place, I have no idea. But yeah, it's really interesting, particularly when, you know, Facebook has a whole research arm and they're constantly running schemes to try and combat misinformation and disinformation. And now they're doing this to, you know, quash it further. So it's, you know, to actually let disinformation flourish. So I think, you know, Facebook needs accurate information. So I'm really, you know, I find it really crazy what's actually happening and their power play on this.
Yeah, misinformation obviously seems to be a big concern. Yeah, what's your thoughts, Aaron?
Well, what I love about what Karen said there, of course, is the fact that Facebook finds it so hard. What do they spend $1 billion to try and get rid of fake news. There are child porn issues that have been going on as well across Facebook. But in one day, they were able to shut down Australian news organisations. Real news, they could shut down that quickly. And with it goes a whole bunch of utilities that Australians need as well. The whole world is watching this. My Twitter is full of French media, British media, US media, even Chinese media. The Chinese are looking at Facebook and going, we probably wouldn't even do this. It's incredible. On the other side, the Australian government now seems to have picked a fight with the biggest tech companies in the world, as well as the Chinese. Just imagine if Facebook was a Chinese company.
But another way of looking at it, though, there has been that symbiotic relationship. Facebook has driven something like 15 to 20% of traffic to these media companies. Facebook is a referral. Facebook is a recommender. Just like Google. Between Google and Facebook, I think it's close to 40% of all visits to media sites are from those sources. They are doing media a favour by obviously pushing traffic towards these media sites. I mean, at what point do the media then say, well, it's our responsibility to foster quality journalism by monetizing it better, rather than necessarily then saying, well, Facebook, we're going to charge you for giving us traffic and for giving us business? To me, it's nonsensical. And so therefore, as much as this idea of shutting down journalism, it's a great line, it's a good way of framing it, but at the same time...
But Connie, if I can jump in on that, I agree with you. The legislation isn't great. And I can completely see Facebook's perspective on this. And even though I'm a media owner, I guess, I can definitely see the other side of this because I'm a journalist first, right? But here's the thing. It wasn't so long ago that Facebook was courting the Australian TV companies. You might remember those Facebook watch bulletins, Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 10, even SBS, Sky News as well. They all paid apparently something like $1 million by Facebook. Why? Because Facebook was using the Australian incumbents for credibility to get people to try out Facebook Watch. Facebook has needed Australian large media companies for credibility, and now those companies have turned around and said, give us money. Because the second that Facebook stopped paying for Facebook Watch, the content disappeared and the network stopped producing them.
And we saw that there used to be these sites like BuzzFeed that were massive, and now you barely hear from them anymore because of that pivot to video, which is obviously a huge issue. But at the same time, does this not set a dangerous precedent if we're saying that if you've got upstream traffic, and the parallel that I have is if Fairfax decided that they were going to stop their good food guide and they were going to stop referring and doing restaurant reviews and referrals, does that mean that now restaurants have to charge Fairfax to refer to their restaurant? I'm just trying to me, that if we start down this road, this precedent, I don't know, to be honest, it doesn't make any sense to me.
But what kind of impact do you think this is going to have on Facebook's reputation? I've seen a lot of people deleting the app today or turning away from it just because they've been shocked by, I guess, like you said, Aaron, how quickly they stepped in and made such a significant change.
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of people have a pretty bad taste in their mouth. But I mean, look, Facebook has got antitrust suits right around the world. Europe are watching them, saying you're too big, same as Google. The United States Senate, I mean, this is the country. Look at during the election campaign, Facebook managed to anger everyone, both sides of politics. Their day of reckoning is still to come in the United States for how the US is going to treat them. Mark Zuckerberg probably gets a sore neck from having to rock up to all the Senate inquiries that he turns up to. They're using Australia. And let's not forget here, the UK has accepted a deal from Facebook. So Facebook has agreed to pay British publishers, but they won't pay Australian publishers. And they've decided that this is the line in the sand that they'll take. What are your thoughts, Karen?
Yeah, look, I just find it really interesting. I think they both need each other. I really do. I agree with there is that symbiotic relationship, but it's working out exactly how it's actually going to work on an economic level. So yes, should Facebook then charge for traffic to sending traffic to the news site?
Yeah, exactly.
But then how do the news sites have the money to actually produce the content that will Facebook could then send the traffic to the news site? So they need each other. Facebook needs accurate information on its platform, but the media outlets need to be able to survive in a climate where journalism is just starting to really unravel just because it's just that you're right, you need more sort of monetization parts to it, so it's economically viable for both parties as well, and also for the users. Like, I think having news on Facebook has actually made people look at news a lot more than they were originally. They weren't seeking it out on the platforms, and now they're actually going there. But in saying that too, like, how can it continue? How can the content be produced without the money to do it?
I really wonder how long it's going to last though. Like, who's going to give in here? Because from the federal government's point of view, I was wondering when Josh Frydenberg, the Treasurer, was speaking about half an hour ago, whether he was going to up the ante and say, you know what, stop sending your profits to Ireland. We're going to come after you, Facebook. And every time an Australian business boosts or tries to get some money through you guys, we're going to take 10% of that in GST off you guys and bring some of that money back in. I mean, that's the next step, right? This could go in that direction. Or Facebook would say, well, we've noticed that users have been dropping off. Australians love news, the top TV shows every night, and news programs. I watch my father when I'm in Queensland. He sits on Facebook. That's where he gets his news. He won't be on Facebook if that isn't where he gets his news. Facebook will be watching very closely to see whether anyone disappears off their platform because of this. It'll be interesting to see who blinks.
Yeah, and I do want to play you a grab from the Federal Treasurer. He spoke not long ago. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Facebook was wrong. Facebook's actions were unnecessary. They were heavy-handed, and they will damage its reputation here in Australia. Their decision to block Australians' access to government sites, be they about support through the pandemic, mental health, emergency services, the Bureau of Meteorology, were completely unrelated to the media code, which is yet to pass through the Senate. But what today's events do confirm for all Australians is the immense market power of these media digital giants. These digital giants loom very, very large in our economy and on the digital landscape. The Morrison government remains absolutely committed to legislating and implementing the code. And we want to thank Google for the very constructive discussions that they have been having with stakeholders, and we recognise the announcement earlier today between Google and News Limited about their successful negotiations. It follows on from the announcement by Channel 7 and Google and the reports of the successful negotiations between Channel 9.
So the Federal Treasurer there, Josh Frydenberg, saying that Facebook got it wrong and essentially commending Google for the deal that they have reached with Seven West Media. So do you think there is an end in sight? Will we see a deal struck eventually?
I think
That's a good question.
I think
Sorry, you go,
there's
Karen.
a drastic to show what Facebook could actually do. They've been threatening this for a while now, so it really is no surprise that they actually did it. I just think that possibly the government just thought they would, they were just bluffing. But, it would be interesting to see how it plays out.
Aaron, what's your perspective on that?
A large part of... a large part of Google and Facebook's strategy since their beginning has been to be the front page of the web, or to eat the web in certain circumstances. And I think this may be the start of an unwinding of that strategy from them. And the question is, who fills the gap? Does this mean that the media organisations start to look at a way in which they can be the front page of the web? Can they be the first place that people go to in the morning versus, say, the social networks such as Facebook or, for example, Google as a search engine? And I think that's got a much bigger role to play in terms of their broad strategies.
And
yeah,
Darren,
it's a good
what's your
point.
take?
Yeah, I feel like what we're witnessing is finally old and new crashing together. Obviously, we as consumers are the ones who make decisions. I don't go to the news agency and subscribe to a good old-fashioned newspaper anymore. It's all on my iPhone. And, you got to wonder whether Apple will say, now we want your money because it's on our device, because we've cut the costs of having to cut down trees and print newspapers and to go to the news agency. I mean, the world is completely changing. My concern is that the federal government is protecting its own friends in the club of the mainstream media, which has been around for a long time. You hear them talking about Seven West and Nine and News Corp. What about the small players? What about all those independent news organisations out there that haven't asked for anything from Facebook, get nothing from the government? We at Ticket don't even get JobKeeper, yet Channel 7 made a $120 million profit last year, and every employee was on JobKeeper. That is the difference of where we see things from where the government is. I haven't heard anyone talking about the independent media out there at the moment who are, rolling up their sleeves and don't have huge corporate offices and massive HR and legal firms and $3 million libel claims because they've splashed something on the front page that was incorrect, that they had to pay that person. Media needs to take a really good hard look at itself. In my view, the corporate nature that we've witnessed over the past 20, 30 years of media is now, they're stuck. People aren't going to pay for that content like they were hoping they would. Fingers crossed that they would, they just haven't. News is a commodity, and media organisations, the ones that can figure out a way to make money, are the ones that will survive. Those who try and twist their friends in government's hands to make these decisions, we can all see the holes in the legislation. Everyone's hoping it's okay, and they will be hoping that the pile on Facebook will be enough to change Facebook's mind. Facebook doesn't give two rats about the Australian market because it's such a tiny, tiny percentage of what they do. So it would be more that they're drawing a line in the sand to say to other countries, you do to us what the Australian government tried to do, and this is what the response will be.
Well, thank you all, Con, Karen and Aaron, for joining me today. Really some great insight. It'll be really interesting to see how this all unfolds over the next few days.
Thank you.
Indeed.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.